I have put together, I have assembled, or other people have assembled. They're here. Let's just leave it at that. They're all here, and we're going to be talking about the new Dune TTRPG from a production and insight from all different angles. You've watched the playthrough of that very interesting, as everyone's quoting, HR shakedown, which I think was absolutely, it was so nice. It's what we love about role-playing, right? So I have got joining me, I have got one of the few in the world who is known as a squirrel whisperer. And that is a gentleman named Chris Birch. Chris, how are you doing?
Hello. Yeah, very good. Thank you. Yeah, eagle-eyed people might spot a few squirrels in our background because we have a family of squirrels that come into the house. I think they've been training us over the year to feed them. So
there we are. Those of you who don't know who Chris is, he's one of the he's the founder of Modiphius. We've also got Andy Peregrine, who joins us as a writer and the Dune line manager for obviously this particular TTRPG. And then Jason Durall, who you don't need to know because you watched him run a great game recently, who's also a writer on the game as well. So thank you, gentlemen, for joining us this evening or this afternoon, wherever you happen to be in the world. And we're going to start asking questions about the new Dune TTRPG. Okay, first question that I had when I was looking at this whole thing, when I was looking at the Dune concept in terms of as a role-playing system, why make it in the first place? I know it sounds like a silly question, but there might be more to it. So let me throw that out. Chris, why is Modiphius making the Dune TTRPG?
Good question. Well, I mean, we're big geek fans of, a lot of these big properties. And even myself, the reason why I'm doing this is because I used to go and help my grandfather sell comic books and science fiction and fantasy novels when I was a kid. And I'd come home with shopping bags full of graphic novels and books to read as payment. I was very cheap wage slave then. So I absorbed all this stuff as a kid, whether it is Isaac Asimov or Robert E. Howard, Edgar Rice Burroughs, and of course, Brian Herbert and Frank Herbert. So it's, all this fantastic mythology that we've got to the science fiction universe has been ingrained in me since I was a kid. So when the opportunity came up to do Dune, it was just a yes, please. And we leapt at it and dived headlong in, and obviously we've put a great team together.
Absolutely. And Andy, what were your thoughts when you were sort of told we're doing Dune?
It's simply I want in right now. I've practically nagged Chris into letting me do the job. I'm a huge Dune fan, and I still think these days it's almost like saying when you say shouldn't why do it? It's a case of it's like not doing Lord of the Rings if there's already fantasy games out there. It's such a fundamental work of science fiction, and still I think one that's not really been some of the bits and pieces in it are still unique to Dune. You don't find many science fiction backgrounds where religion is still important, where there's no computers and robots. That's almost unheard of still. And even with the books being written, now comparatively quite some time ago, there's just still nothing like it out there. It's one of the reasons I love it so much. So as soon as I heard Modiphius had it, I just nagged Chris a lot and bludgeoned him into submission until he said, "Okay, you can do something." Do it. Great. But it's amazing to be part of it. So I'm still overjoyed to be part of it.
Jason, you've run a couple games with the Dune system now. Or was this one one of your first?
This is actually the first chance I've gotten to run these particular scenarios for Dune. So it was quite nice to hit the open trail, so to speak. And this was a bit of a combination of two of these scenarios that we've got that have been sort of optimized for the short period.
Right, absolutely. And are you as much of a Dune enthusiast as everybody else?
It's like I feel like Marcus Brody talking about going after the Ark of the Covenant when it comes to Dune. It's one of those fundamental archetypical science fiction settings. I first encountered the books when I was a teen, and they stuck with me. And as Chris and Andrew have both mentioned, the mix of politics and religion and environmental issues, ecology, and all of this just put together into this epic generation-spanning saga. It's like nothing else in fantasy or science fiction, really. You would have to basically, the only thing that stands up next to it is the Lord of the Rings. And so the idea of working on it is, from a very, it's always been on my holy grail list of IPs to get to take a whack at.
Fantastic. Now, that is something that I must admit, my knowledge of Dune is okay. I read the covers of some of the books, which is great. Yes, I confess.
Very short titles.
Yeah. Having said that, though, is the role-playing system quite lore heavy? I mean, do you have to go in knowing what Bene Gesserit is and what this is and what that is? I mean, do you need to go in with all of that kind of knowledge? How heavy is the role-playing system in terms of that lore? Andy, what are your thoughts?
It really depends how far you want to take it to a certain degree. I mean, we have the setting itself covers about 20,000 years, planets across hundreds of galaxies. It's the whole thing is vast. So what we've done to pull that down, not only have we included in the book a vast amount of detail on what all these things actually are. So if you read the core book, you've got everything you need. And there's still plenty to expand into. But you've also got an element of refocusing the game on Arrakis itself, the planet Dune. So we're taking all of the stuff there, and we've focused on this one small area, it's the most important planet in the universe. And from there, we can then expand out. So you can get used to this setting, and then gradually add and include more stuff in your game as you go. So there's enough that it's the most important place for people who are Dune fans, can dive into, somewhere spectacular they can really get to grips with. But also, if you're completely new, if you want to just put a toe in the water, we're going to take you in steps, hold your hand through this huge setting, so it doesn't just bowl you over with all the stuff it's got going in it.
Fantastic. And Jason, as you say, you sort of this was putting together bits of some of the adventures and the like. It sounds like you have very good Dune knowledge. The guys that you were playing with now, everyone seemed to be kind of getting into it. Do you think there's that barrier for players as well?
I think that the goal that we made the game about, or made the game with, was to make it a very presentable setting. I mean, ultimately, you're dealing with humans. You're dealing with people who are connected to each other through ties of either a family unit or a house that they all serve under. They all have very, very human desires and goals. I mean, the connection of politics and this sort of feudal hierarchy is easy to grasp. And so, like one of the guys, he's like, I'm a sword master. I'm basically a dedicated guard who's incredibly skilled in the swords. I'm a mentat. I'm a human computer. I'm an investigator. I process information. And then I'm a criminal. I'm connected to criminal scum. None of them needed to come into this that setting or the session I just ran with any deep background or knowledge, and they all managed to just put on those roles very, very easily. And our character creation system lets you build characters that are very specifically suited to the world without having to come in with this enormous laundry list of accumulated backstory before you even begin role playing.
I mean, this has been one of the things to balance, because there are these iconic character types like Bene Gesserit, the Mentats, but also your characters can just be agents of a house. And what we've done is balance these things so that if you want one of these, what we call faction characters, you're not suddenly more powerful than anybody else. There's plenty of cool abilities and crazy stuff that people can take with their characters. So if you're a Dune fan and you've got, oh, I really want to play a Bene Gesserit, it's not going to be like sort of, you know, how sometimes Jedi in Star Wars make everything suddenly all the power, they've got force powers nobody else has. If you've never played Dune, you go, well, I just want to be an agent. You're going to be just as good, just as interesting, and just as great a character. But we've got all the iconic stuff in the book as well, so you can play the things you love and play new things and develop your own stuff within your house, because everyone is useful to that house in some way.
Fantastic, fantastic. And Chris, what do the squirrels say?
They say,
Well, that's what I love about live shows. Okay, that's fantastic. Okay, brilliant. Okay, all right. So we got lots of questions coming through.
I know, they're just
from people. It's
scrolling
fantastic.
by
It's
here.
fantastic. It's like I'm looking at the scripted questions. I'm going, maybe we should just move straight on to these ones. So I'm going to take one question now from the audience, which our moderators are sending through. Okay, let's see. All right, that one has already been answered. So Scott's case files asked, how do you represent those with powers like the Mentats, the Bene Gesserit, and so on without making them I win this game? So we've already sort of handled that one. So thank you, Scott's case files, for asking that one. Prime Gaining Akko Doken says, Akko Doken, I should say, how many books are you planning for the Dune game line? Is that sort of like a question about string?
Many. That's up to the boss to decide how much to share.
enough books.
Yes. Yes.
I think it's probably the yeah. I mean, we've got a 2 or 3 years worth of plans, and you know, you can't really plan beyond that. You know, whilst you're launching a new game, but there's you know, we're covering all the bases in the, you know, that are important within the first couple of years.
Fantastic. You're going to have plenty to read. I'll guarantee you that.
Yeah.
Then the Warp Ghost says, what element of the Dune RPG design are you most proud of and why? That's a good question. Andy?
Well, I've kind of got two for this one, but one of them isn't specific to Dune. It's something I absolutely adore about the 2D20 system, and that's the difficulty 0 roll, which I'm a huge fan of, because there are so many games where you say your players come into a party, and the first thing somebody says is, "Oh, I want to do a turn around the room and get some rumors," and the GM goes, "I've got a list of rumors for you," or then makes you roll for each individual person you talk to get some lay of the land stuff. In Dune, you can do a difficulty 0 roll. You can say, all right, I'm going to do an understand roll. I'm going to use some of my bonuses from being good at parties. I can make a difficulty 0 roll, which means that I gain a load of momentum from that based on how many successes I get. And I haven't got a floor to pick. It's basically however well I roll is bonus points I use for later. And that now represents all of the rumors that I've heard, all of maybe the other bits and pieces, friendships I've made in a turn of the room. And you can then use that. And when you play these momentum points, you could say, this is because I heard this momentum point, I'm spending it because I heard a rumor that he's your enemy over there. And you can role play this into all your into the system, which is just fantastic. But the other one, so I'm hogging all the question here. The other one that I love about what Dune does that 2D20 doesn't usually do is our architect and agent system. So because we have separated the physical aspects of your character from every roll, so you don't roll your dexterity, you roll what you are trying to do, the drive behind it, and your skill, that this means that you don't have to actually be there. So if you want to lead a group to attack, say, another fortress, you can do like you can in a lot of role-playing games. You can do it as an agent where you go in, you're fighting with the other guys, and you're using your gun assets or whatever to hit people with and to take control of the facility. Or you can, from another planet away, do exactly the same roles with different assets. And then now this case, you're taking a group of soldiers and you're sending them in as an asset to do the job for you. So you can be the puppet masters behind the plans that you're doing, or you can be the boots on the ground with the same system. And it's up to you how you answer every single challenge, whether you're a planet away or inside it. And that lets you really do that Dune feel of being the puppet master behind things, as well as it, which I absolutely love. So,
Jason, any highlights from you?
I would just say, rather than a core element of design, which my focus has been primarily on the content development, and I think that the thing that I'm proudest about is that this is very clearly a labor of love to the intellectual property, to this magnificent creation that is Dune, and just the fidelity to trying to bring the experience of Dune to the gaming table. And from a very early stage, I was a very strong champion of the idea of bringing really focusing on Arrakis as being the core of play. I mean, Arrakis is where most of the first series of books is set. It is the name on, Dune is the name on every book. And so I felt that it was absolutely essential that a game called Dune be set on Dune primarily. And so that is, I think the thing that I am happiest to see that we've sort of gone with.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Chris, anything from you?
I think really that it's it's a step change from our normal Conan kill everything that moves. Star Trek, Star Trek, it was actually probably the first game where it's much more about the people and talking to people, and it's not always about picking up phasers and shooting them in the face, unless you're playing Klingons, of course. So and Dune was that challenge to create a game where we've just seen in the Sing with Jason's game, the guys almost had a knife fight in a side street, which of course it can happen, but this game challenges you to do things differently. And I think I'm really proud that the team we've been able to create quite a masterpiece that will let people role play in different ways than they might normally expect. But if you just want to go around shooting people, well, knife fighting, which obviously is a big thing in Dune, if you want to go around and have lots of knife fights, of course you can, but this game is designed from the ground up to do things differently, and I think it does it in spades.
Well, fantastic. The more I hear about it, the more I kind of want to dive in and get sandy, I suppose. So how are we in terms of the houses? Can you come from a great house? I mean, is that integral that you have to come from a house versus I don't know, growing up on the streets? How is that handled? I mean, Andy, you briefly touched on it in terms of being able to be the puppet master. Is every player going to be the head of a house? Is that how we start?
That's how one of the things we're linking together is all of you are part of the same house in this, and it's a house you create. So part of this will be deciding what your house is all about, where it gets its power from, where it gets its leverage. And we're going to expand that system. It's not just going to be there's the core book and it's done. As we go through the line, as we move off Arrakis for more stuff, we are going to expand how the houses work and how much detail you have, because that will track with how your characters improve. They may take more power in the house. So in the core book, you're agents, so you're not necessarily leading it, but you could still be the younger son of the leader of the house and be groomed to take over one day. You are the elite agents. You're not just a couple of minions for them. You're the guys they send when they need something done properly. So as time goes on, you then may take more power in your house, and therefore you can take more control, and we will expand the house system for that. But you can start as, this is one of the things I was a big fan of. If you want to be just a house miner, just a really quiet house that nobody's really heard of, and building something new, that's fine. If you want to be a major house with 2 or 3 planets under control, that's also fine too. But the more power you have, the more threat the GM's going to start with. So if you want power, that's fine. But you're going to have to expect that the more you have, the more dangerous people there are out there looking to take it from. And so you don't bite off more than you chew, basically. Do you think you can hold it? That's up to you to do so. But the main thing is getting with all these houses. There's a sort of load of great narrative stuff decide, I mean, you have to remember as well that, House Atreides, for instance, they're mainly a farming house. They get most of their stuff from Pundi rice. And, but of course, every house has all kinds of other bits and pieces in it. So everything is as cool as you want to make it. You can be, the merchant who does, all kinds of weird weapons, scientific houses, farming houses, philosophy and art. And you can also create something which has we're a house that creates actors, but we also secretly provide assassins for the rest of the universe. It's up to you to put together what you're good at and what you do. So I think people are going to have a lot of fun with that.
And is there support for encouraging people on how to go about designing these houses, Jason? Is there material in there for that?
Absolutely, yes. It's a process where the players collaboratively come up with their house and decide what assets it holds and what strengths it possesses. It's all very much part of the core game experience.
Fantastic. Okay, back to some of your questions with regards to the Dune TTRPG. And so we now go to Count Thalem, who asks this question. After the first era, how many other Dune eras are you looking at including? Is that something, does that make sense to you folks? To me, it's...
Yes.
Andy?
I'm quite sure how much we're saying about this. I think we are looking at some point to do more with various eras, because there are what the Dune aficionados will know, that we have, obviously, there's the Imperium that is just before the main novel. Then, of course, you've got how things change under Paul after the second novels. And then between Children of Dune and God Emperor of Dune, there's about a gap of another 10,000 and 5,000 years or so, and another section. So it goes, there are lots of different sections, and they're all very different. We are, for this one, focusing on the era we call the Imperium, just before the books. But we may look into other things as they go. But it comes back again to what we said. It's such a vast setting. We're not going to throw everything at you in one go. But you may see the skeleton of some of these things in the original part.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, I think, yes. Let's see. And no, all right, we'll go back to the main questions. Back to main questions. How are the magical or the esoteric elements handled within the game? Because there is quite a strong component to that, as you mentioned earlier. Are there mechanics in the game for that? Is it sort of glossed over as a narrative, Jason? How do you feel?
No, they're mostly handled with talents. I mean, as the various disciplines that use these parahuman or supernormal abilities, they are handled as talents. And in our system, talents are basically ways that you can sort of break the rules. They're the system of exceptions. You can re-roll your dice if this particular condition is met, or when you invoke this talent, this lets you do something that is not according to the normal procedure. So that, I mean, is the simple and easy answer to that. Is talents.
Should also add that they're not, there's no actual magical abilities in this as well. But as just said, there are a lot of things where simply having a particular talent will say, well, normally a normal human couldn't do this.
Right.
But because you have this, you can have a role. So things like the hyper perception of the Bene Gesserit, there are things where characters might say, oh, because you twitched your nose in a particular way, I can tell that you're the enemy of so and so from such and such. That's a thing where normally you wouldn't get a role to detect. But if you've got a particular talent, you can go, actually, I'm going to let you have a role on that. See if you can detect a little bit more, because you're so much better at this than other people. So,
this is an interesting question, hopefully. Chris, what makes Dune so interesting, in your opinion? Why did you love it so much?
Well, apart from growing up with books like this, it's a bit like it's so iconic, because you look at Star Wars, and Tatooine clearly got inspiration from Dune. You look at, there's so many films that took inspiration, just like Lord of the Rings. It's a grandfather epic of science fiction and space opera, really, I suppose. And so there's just so much amazing content in it. And I think, like Andy pointed out, there's no robots and computers. There's no like, wait a minute, I'm just going to go and do my research and check the data systems for, it's a lot more clunky than that. So it does. There's a lot of things that. Well, actually, here's the interesting thing: a lot of science fiction role-playing games are constantly dealing with this sort of like, how do we have sufficiently advanced tech that we don't have now? We've all got iPhones that can let us research, and so Dune takes all that away in a certain extent. So yeah, that's my answer. I think it's very iconic.
Yeah, Jason, your thoughts? What makes Dune interesting?
To me, I think that it is this notion of, well, and believe me, I say this with great love towards a great many other settings, is that, for example, with Star Wars, you're basically dealing with a sort of a fantasy setting that's got a science fiction gloss to it. And I think when people try to add politics and whatnot to that, it becomes a little bit unrecognizable. Whereas with Dune, you've got this just Byzantine culture, this deep sense of history to the world and the setting, and this Baroque aspect, this whole feudal system laying over this science fictional universe, that you could have gigantic space liners that can cross the galaxy in the blink of an eye, and yet there are farmers on planets up to their knees pulling rice out of the ground, and singing rice collecting songs. And that one of the most precious elements in the universe is this weird spice that makes everything happen, and I don't think there's anything quite like that rich, weird, deep story there. And another thing too is that I don't think anyone was, I know Frank Herbert was not an ecologist, he was somebody who came into this sort of obliquely because it was an interest that he had. He was writing an article about reclaiming sand areas and planting, I can't remember what they called that, charity grass, I think, to try to recover areas that were being lost through erosion. But this notion of like sitting down and going very deep into the idea of like, how would ecology shape religion? How would religion shape politics? How would all of this affect a science fictional universe? And some of the answers he came up with, I think, were quite cool and unexpected, like the lack of computers. He basically made that a religious issue, is there are no robots running around, there are no computers, because a core philosophy of the religion of the setting is that you should not make a computer in a man's image, a thinking computer. And so I think that that's actually why I find personally, I can't speak for everyone, but why I find Dune particularly brilliant and interesting setting is that he went very deep into all of these influences and these inspirations, and came up with a way that the whole universe tends to work like a Swiss watch, like everything is connected, everything goes. Like a lot of other science fictional universes, when you start really poking at the asking big questions, it kind of becomes like sort of hand wavy of like, just don't ask a question about how that all works. Whereas I think with Dune, it's actually pretty easy to start figuring out why everything works in the way it does. And a lot of that, draws from human history as well. So you can find very recognizable patterns in like the way people treat precious resources. In Dune, it's quite obvious, as it is in the real world. Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, that's my answer.
It's a good answer. It's a good answer. It gets you thinking as well. And Andy, anything to add?
Yeah, I'd echo Jason's point. It's the uniqueness of the world, and I love that. I say it's there's so much. Yeah, they've explored so much of the universe, but it's still very human centric. They haven't needed to throw in a pile of big aliens. It's very much a human thing, which also makes it feel a little bit lonely. The universe is quite an empty place, which adds another nice layer to that. But it's also that humanity hasn't just moved on in technology. Humanity has evolved. we're talking 10,000 years, they can do things that we can't. They look very much the same, but they've, their training and skills have moved to such extraordinary lengths. As I say, things that appear to be magic, because you just can't believe a human being could do them. Our speeds of reflex, understandings of the human mind, and yet they still have the same problems, foibles. It's still about people just being nasty to each other in the ways they are today. People want power or too little power, or take power from somebody else, or have got more stuff than somebody else. It's still happening 10,000 years in the future, still doing it. In that sense, it might be a little bit disappointing, but it makes it feel more human and more real, because it's so separate from where we are now, but it's still just the same. And we can all relate to all of those human failings and feelings, and as the same things they aspire to as well.
Absolutely. I think that does definitely give us a strong connection to this space. There isn't that sort of disconnect that you might get with other sort of settings. Another question from chat is, let's see, sorry, Batronaban says, can we play as sandworms?
Why?
Why? Yeah.
So, I mean, we wouldn't stop you. It just might make some of the politics a little tricky.
Yeah.
And I mean, you wouldn't have to roll to eat everyone, but that I think is pretty much the only skill you'd really need. I mean, you would be very good at what you did, granted. So.
Fairly one note as a character.
Yeah, kind of a limited scope there. JRN Mariano asked the question, two major themes in Dune are messianism and ecology. Do you think the game's mechanics bring those issues to the forefront? I mean, are they present?
Andy, you want to jump on that?
I don't know if that's necessarily something that needs to go in mechanics, in a sense that you wouldn't necessarily, I will roll for dealing with ecology, but you can of course have a character where ecology, as their skills, their science, there's no reason not to, and I think a lot of that depends on how the adventures come to pass. So it's really something that we can craft into your adventure. There's nothing stopping us at all doing various bits on ecology and as much as we do politics and anything else in the setting.
Right. I would also say one thing too, to sort of, it touches on a little bit of the Jedi question, or the Jedi answer that came up earlier, is the Dune game is where you construct your houses and you play through their story. And it's like not per se the House Atreides story, the story of Paul Atreides. Like the game is not where everyone is basically playing those three guys standing in the corner while Paul Atreides is in the center of the room doing everything. And so, even though the game demo I just ran earlier was set with Atreides loyalists, there's no reason at all to think that your player characters in your original campaign are going to be focused on those issues, unless, the GM decides that they really want to bring that stuff in.
Makes sense. A question close to my heart, because, well, who doesn't like collecting dice? Chris, there's a question from Count Thalem. How many shinies will we get alongside with the books? Are you thinking tokens, dice?
So yeah, the pre-order that's going to be later this coming week, there's a couple of dice sets. We've got a first, there's two dice sets, one that is exclusive to the pre-order, and one which is going to be available in retail as well. Later next year, we've got some more dice sets coming, and there's other stuff that we're actually working on at the moment. We had a meeting the other day talking about some very cool shinies, so you can expect to see some really fun accessories in the future. So hold that thought.
There we go.
More than just dice.
More than just dice. The dice must flow. I don't know. I kind of feel like I had to make that statement, right? Okay. What advice would you give to someone thinking about playing Dune? Let's start with you, Chris. What advice would you give to someone who goes, you know what, I'm going to give it a try?
Well, I think, I mean, I saw a question that popped up about, you know, is the Dune role-playing game a good introduction to the Dune universe? And I think it is. As Jason was talking about, you know, you can just play quite normal characters. This isn't like a very bizarre universe that you have to get your head around. It's normal people doing normal things. You're agents being sent on a job. You are people higher up in a house, you know, coordinating other groups. So there's nothing massively complex. You know, obviously you've got interesting characters like the Mentat, who is basically a walking computer who can do things that a normal human being can't do now. But I think, you know, you've got a great universe it's a bit like I actually say a lot of the time Lord of the Rings, it was you know, one of those big universes that not everyone knew about before the movies came out, but it was just a very solid awareness, because of course kids had read The Hobbit at school, and so there's a very strong awareness of Dune, and I think people are gonna, you know, kind of clock it and go, oh yeah, this is cool. And I think they'll fit in quite nicely, and I don't think there's any real barriers in the game that make you go, I don't get this, why is it like this?
Yeah.
So,
I'd argue as well that, you know, what Chris says with the Mentat is a really great example as well, because as a character, it might sound really strange that you've got this, you know, almost like a computer brain. But at the end of the day, we know what computers do. So you can say to someone, you know, it's quite simplistic in terms of Mentats, but you can just say, think of yourself as if, what would a computer who is a person think? And you're already there. So a lot of these things don't take too much explanation to let you dive in and start exploring that. And like every game, dive into the world and explore, because there's so much out there.
Jason, anything to add?
Oh, I mean, one of the obvious parallels is when people say, you know, for example, it's a Mentat. Oh, he's a human computer. How do I do that? He's Sherlock Holmes.
yeah.
The character who's just very, very good at absorbing tiny amounts of information and detail that no one else would notice, and running hypotheses and figuring them out. I mean, if you can role play, if you are familiar with Sherlock Holmes, there you go. That's a wonderful character model for how a Mentat might be. Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, even like Game of Thrones, for example, you don't have to know this enormous backstory of Westeros to be able to figure out the primary struggles that define that world. You just can jump into it and play. And I think that the RPG we've created is a wonderful, very accessible doorway into this world.
Well, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. I think that probably sums it up. It definitely sounds like it's covered all the bases. There are so many more questions that have come through. We just don't have the time to answer them, unfortunately. It is, everyone is very eager to see this. I think that's the bottom line. Chris, Andy, and Jason, thank you so much for giving us as much insight into Dune as we could hope to get, I guess, before that release. Chris, you say it's coming out next week?
Yeah, the pre-order kicks off later this week, and then it'll be coming out in the spring. So more news in the week. Watch this space.
Yes, tonight we've got some, you know, design diaries and teasers and all kinds.
Yeah, there should be another design diary up end of Monday, and there'll be more information coming through the week.
Lovely. All right, well, that's it from this panel. Thank you guys for all of your questions. Thank you for all of your answers. And yes, enjoy the next Star Trek adventures. Goodbye.